How do you feel about participating in this project to commemorate the KWVs? Why are you interested in participating in this project?
Um, well, I'm very pleased that I have this opportunity uh, to give my oral history, and I'm interested in doing it because I'm interested in history, and I feel that this is an opportunity for people to give their oral histories and provide them for future generations. Of course, one of the problems in this, living in an electronic age as we do, is that future historians are going to have a difficult time because of the fact of lack of diaries, letters, memoirs, journals, and that's why oral histories are so important. Oh, also, I'd like to thank C-SPAN uh, for airing these programs. And as a matter of fact, that's how I found out about the Legacy Foundation. They've done wonderful work, Brian Lamb and his crew, for the past 40 years, providing very informative programming for the public.
Could you provide your name and age?
My name is Stephen Scott Ford. Um, I'll give you a kind of complicated answer for my date of birth. I'm interested in dates, being a history person of interest to me. Um, let's see, today is July 14th, which is Bastille Day. 1 week from today, July 21st, I will be exactly uh, 3/4 of my way through my 88th year. So, in other words, my birthday is October 21st, and I was born in the year 1931.
When did you enlist in the Army? What branch did you enlist into? What was your specialty, unit, and when did you rotate to your destination?
Uh, well, I have to tell you how I happened to get into the Army. I enlisted on January 16th, 1952, and the reason I enlisted was because the Marines at that time were drafting people. I don't think they did it during World War II, but they did during the Korean War. And I was not interested in being drafted into the Marines. So the Army was offering a 2-year enlistment, the same as a draftee would have. And I knew my draft number was coming up. So I enlisted in the Army for 2 years. Um, I went to, I said January 16th, I went in and I went right to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. And it was the middle of winter, cold. A couple days in the Army, they called us together and say, anybody want to go to Hawaii for the basic training? Yeah, I want to go. Even as I raised my hand, I remember that my father had told me never, ever volunteer for anything in the service. He had served in the Air Force in World War II. And so I thought, well, I'm probably never going to get to Korea, so I'll enlist. And I'll volunteer to go, and I did. And got to Hawaii around sometime in February, and went to Schofield Barracks, where I took my infantry basic training for 16 weeks. And my memory of that is one of the first things I did when I got to Schofield Barracks was go to the post library and ask for James Jones' novel, From Here to Eternity, which was set in Schofield Barracks, a novel just before and after Pearl Harbor. And it was a best-selling novel, and I had to put my name on a waiting list, and I left Hawaii 4 or 5 months later, and my name was still on the waiting list. So I didn't get to read that novel until I got out of the Army. My impressions of Schofield Barracks and Hawaii, I found it hard to believe I was in the Army. We had tables that seated 4, which had tablecloths. We didn't have the food served to us. We had to get in line and put it on our metal tray. But all our birthdays were observed. Anybody in our company or platoon who had a birthday during training, it was celebrated with a cake. The two non-commissioned officers that were head of our platoon. One was a Hawaiian who was a sergeant. The other was a corporal who was an Anglo. They were both very friendly and not rough or tough at all. Although the training was, as I said, 16 weeks of basic training. And I remember the first couple of days we were there, we were out on one of the lanais, one of the verandas, and we were looking out at the quadrangle, and troops were marching in from daily field exercise. And these guys were obviously had been there many more weeks than we had. We'd only been there a couple of days. And they were marching sharply, in step, and bellowing out the cadence count in unison. And we all looked at one another and thought, are we ever going to be like that? And we were. We got to be good. Also, well, all right, what's the next question?
What did you think about going to Korea to fight? What was your impression about the Korean War?
I didn't want to go at all. I did find out once I got to Korea, I think one of the reasons we were treated so well was because the next stop was Korea, Hawaii being well on the way. And the only way you could get home was if you showed a round-trip plane ticket from Honolulu to your nearest home airport. And very, very few of us could afford to do that. And it was only for like a 10-day leave. So what probably 98% of the people did was they had a 10-day leave in Honolulu, and then they shipped out immediately to Korea. But I found a way to get back and get out of that, and that was to apply for officer candidate school. And at that time, you had a choice. There were about 12 different schools, one of which had to be a combat arm. It either had to be armored, infantry, or artillery. And I picked artillery as my combat choice because I thought that's pretty far from the front line. And then I think my primary choice was Medical Service Corps. My second choice was the Signal Corps, because that was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, close to where I lived in New York City. So I had an interview with a panel of officers, asked many questions, and finally they looked at me and one of them said, "Now, candidate, I'm going to give you a hypothetical question. I'd like to hear your answer." He said, "You're out with your patrol. You've got maybe 12 or 15 men are with you. You're on a hill and you're attacked. And the enemy is all around you. What would you do?" So I'm thinking, what is the answer he wants to hear? And I came up with, "Follow me." And they all looked at one another, looked down at their papers, and they wrote something in and nodded to one another. And it was the infantry school at Fort Benning to which I was assigned. And when I arrived there, right outside of Columbus, Georgia, a month or two later, there was a mound with a sword stuck into it. And it said, the motto of the infantry school, "Follow me." I thought, boy, I did myself there. So I went through, 19 weeks. I was about 3 weeks from graduating from officer candidate school when I was called before a review board because I had been trying to find ways to get out of this. I was not interested in serving as an infantry officer in either Korea or Germany. You would be sent to one or the other, and you would have to serve an extra year in the service. And I got myself out, and they said, "We're going to make an example out of you. We're going to send you to FECOM." And FECOM is an acronym for Far East Command. And so I got a 30-day leave. I went home, and then I flew from New York City to San Francisco and shipped out from there and arrived in Yokohama, Japan. I think it was Sasebo, which was a former naval base, Japanese naval base, sometime in, beginning of May, 1953. And I remember they called us, we were there to, sight our rifles, get all the combat gear that we were going to need. And they called us out for a big address. So there must have been several hundred of us there. And I don't remember anything they said except, now does anyone here play the organ? Because the post chaplain here needs an organist. And every one of us wanted to put our hand up, but it went down because none of us could play the organ. So we got on the boat and we went to Korea from Yokohama. That maybe took a day or so. And when we got to Incheon, we landed on the western coast of Korea. And this was, again, as I say, in May of 1953. And as we got off the boats and started going in towards the shore, by the way, it was perfectly peaceful there because MacArthur had this brilliant idea back in September of 1950 of coming around up on the coast, western coast, and then cutting down into the southeast corner where our troops were pretty much embattled at Pusan. So by 1953, there were no enemy soldiers there. But as we got on the boat and came into shore, we could hear a band playing, and the band was playing, California, here I come, right back where I started from. And here we are, having come from California. And we see these guys coming down the beach. They've got their duffel bags. They're waiting for us to get off the boats so they can get on the boats and go home and get discharged. And what are they saying to us? They're saying, you'll be sorry, you'll be sorry. And then the first introduction really to war came to me when we got on the troop train that was going to take us to the eastern part of the peninsula of Korea, to the MLR, the main line of resistance. Because once the train started up and moving, the tracks on both sides of the car were lined with children and old people. And every one of them was begging. Mm. And we threw out everything we had, every gum, cigarettes, food, rations, everything. And that train trip lasted for, I think, 4 or 5 hours. And there was never anything but people on both sides of the car begging for anything. Then, as we were getting to move up to the front lines, we had to load on trucks. And I remember there were 2 benches on each side, and guy sat down opposite me, and he had on a field jacket, and on the field jacket, he had a CIB, which is a Combat Infantryman's badge. And this guy didn't look any older than I was, 20 or 21 years old. In other words, he couldn't have been in World War II. The only thing this meant was, obviously, that he was coming back for a second tour of duty in Korea, which struck me as pretty crazy. The other thing I remember about that truck ride is we were riding at night, and we were going up into the mountains, and in the distance, maybe 5-10 miles away, we could see I was probably 50 caliber machine gun bullets going up into the sky, and they were every third bullet was a tracer, and it was sort of reminded me of fireworks, and it was really beautiful to see, even though it was not meant to be beautiful at all. Then when we got to very close to where we were going to be assigned to our company, we spent a night on the backside of a hill, and I remember there was an artillery unit nearby, and they were firing, but there was a lot of talk amongst us, the raw recruits, is that incoming or is that outgoing? And somebody said, don't worry about it, it's outgoing. And it was outgoing, it wasn't coming in. Got up in the morning, loaded all our gear, and I was told I was going to Able Company, A Company, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. And we were assigned to an outpost called Tom. Our regiment had 3 outposts, which it looked after, Tom, Dick, and Harry. So he loaded up all our gear, and we walked around the side of the hill, and we came out into a valley. And in the distance, we could see mountains. And this is about the 15th of May, 1953. And right near us, as we walked by around the side of the hill, there was a tree, and on the tree there was a plaque, and hand-scribed it said, "You are now within enemy observation. Keep your distance." And that was a weird feeling. I mean, I thought, and I looked out at the hills and the mountains, and I thought, they're out there, they're probably looking at us. So we kept our distance, but that was a strange feeling. And then I got assigned to the company, and I don't know, maybe we better pick up here with your questions again.
Let's see. I think we're on 7 now. You answered 6. What were the living conditions like where you were stationed? Was it hard? Was there a lot of downtime?
Well, it certainly wasn't a lot of downtime. I mean, you were either on guard, or you were on patrol, or you were out on listening post. And if you weren't doing any of those things, you were digging and filling sandbags and building bunkers. The motto of the 15th Infantry Regiment was "Can Do," but we called it "Can Dig" because we did a lot of digging. So there wasn't much downtime at all. And we were stationed on the MLR, the main line of resistance, for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then we would be relieved and go into what they called a blocking position, which would be maybe 2 or 3 miles to the rear of the MLR. And we were there as a reserve in case something happened on the MLR and we would be needed to be called up. And we did get a hot shower back there, and we got, well, I can't remember about food, but it was, in other words, it's sort of a rest area. But also we got called up more than once to go up on the line during the time, that period that we were supposedly back in a reserve position.
Let's see. When did you rotate home from Korea? Where were you stationed? What did you do then?
Well, I think we're jumping a little ahead here. Let me just say that one of the questions is about what were the worst, the best, and favorite things that happened to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's...
while I was there.
Yeah, we can go through questions that, you know, we can like skip around, right?
Totally.
Okay, cool. I think I see which one that is. That's
Yeah.
What were the most challenging / difficult, happiest, rewarding memories during your duty? What was your favorite / worst memory of the war?
What was what?
Your favorite / worst memory of the war?
Well, probably one of the worst certainly was a patrol that we went out on June 8th, 1953, a reconnaissance patrol. We went out platoon size, which means about 40 people, and we were split into 2 sections, 20 each. And this friend of mine named Owen Hendricks and I were picked to carry infrared sniper scopes. So we had to train with them because we'd never worked with them before. And we did. And we went out. It was a beautiful late spring, early summer night, evening. And guys were talking and joking and smoking. And because there hadn't been any interaction between us and the Chinese on patrol in several weeks. That's what we were told. Anyway, the Chinese seemed to know that we were coming, and they hit us hard. And in the ensuing firefight, 8 of our people were killed, including my friend, and about 15 were wounded. So that is one of the most harrowing memories I have of the war. Another one, it was good, was I remember once we got fresh eggs served however we wanted them. And that was a great treat after eating powdered eggs for months. Another bad experience was a friend of ours. There were about 3 or 4 of us who were friends. One of them got killed by an artillery shell. And shortly after he was killed, a birthday cake arrived from, no, I'm not sure if it was birthday. It might have been just a cake of some kind, arrived from his wife. And the 3 or 4 of us had a discussion about what are we going to do with the cake. And we decided that we would eat it. But that before we would have a moment of silence, of prayer or meditation. And the cake was good, but the memories were bad. The happiest moment had to be at 10 o'clock at night, July 27th, 1953, when the war ended. We were informed that morning at around 10 o'clock or around noon, we were told there was going to be a ceasefire at 10 o'clock that night. And between that time and 10 o'clock, when the ceasefire went into effect, both sides expended all of their ammunition. So there was an awful lot of shelling, and a lot of people got hurt. And anyway, at 10 o'clock it ended, and I remember the reaction that several of us had was that some idiot, either on their side or our side, would get trigger happy and the whole thing would start all over again. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen. And as soon as the war ended, the company needed a typist. And they said, anybody here type? And I said, well, I can make a go at it. So I got to be the company clerk, which was a good job. But it entailed an awful lot of work because a lot of people were rotating and going home for discharge. And I had to type out these forms and the discharge papers. And they had to be done not in duplicate, but like 7 or 8 copies. So I had to fit all of this into the typewriter with a carbon because we didn't have a mimeograph machine. And that was a lot of work. And that went on for maybe a couple of months until October. And peace held. And the food got better. And I kept counting the days until I was going to go home. And just, well, sometime in late October, I knew I was going to leave in November to come home. And sometime in October, I got a notification that asking me if I would like to be the librarian for the 3rd Infantry Division. And that would entail having a van and a driver, and the van would be full of books, and I would drive all over the terrain where the 3rd Division was stationed and be a lending book librarian. And I thought, oh, what a great idea. I would love doing it, but I'm going home. So on Thanksgiving Day, I was on a ship somewhere in the North Pacific on my way home and landed here at Fort Lewis in early December, and I was discharged on December 12th, 1953.
What foreign troops / allies did you encounter online? What was your impression of them?
The only foreign troops I encountered were a battalion of Greeks which were attached to our company, or maybe our battalion. And my impression of them was that these guys were kind of crazy because they were coming up on the hill to relieve us, and they were singing and dancing and bouncing around like they were going to go to a party, a ball. I would assume that all of those guys were volunteers.
When were you discharged from military service? What did you do, and how did you adjust to living in the U.S.?
Well, as I said, I was discharged on December 12th, 1953. And I think within a day or two, I went up to Brooks Brothers, a clothier in New York City, and bought myself a gray flannel suit, a pink button-down shirt, and a black knit tie. I sort of predated the best-selling novel, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, because I wanted to get the Army back, get rid of it as quickly as possible. And I did, and there was I had no problems about bad dreams or bad thoughts or anything. And as far as the people I knew, my family, it was a quick and immediate adjustment to peacetime, except for one incident that occurred shortly after I got out of the Army. I went to a party, and there was a guy there who was had served in the 2nd Infantry Division in Korea, and he was very distraught. I remember he was very nervous, and when he found out that I'd been in Korea and that I'd been in the 3rd Infantry Division, he got really upset and almost violent because he accused me and the 3rd Infantry Division of deserting his people, and he had to be literally pulled away. And that was the only bad experience that I had after I got home from the war.
Mm. Do you have any animosity towards the opposition, negative thoughts or feelings about the war / actions that took place?
No, I don't. I have no bad feelings about the Chinese at all. I have to say that we referred to the Chinese as chinks, and we referred to the South Koreans as gooks. Now, I don't remember whether I did that or not, but it was very, very common. That's how people were referred to. And the Chinese as a whole were referred to as Uncle Joes, meaning referring to Stalin, who died just about the time that I got to Korea. I might add that slang words that we had were, one was that we brought home with us too. One was no sweat. In other words, no problem. Don't worry about it. No sweat. That was very common. Another one was boondocks, meaning somewhere way out in the wilderness. And that was very, very common. And I have to speak about the only interaction I had with Koreans. I didn't have any with the South Korean Army personnel. I did have a little bit with the Service Corps people who pumped the ammunition and brought it up and the supplies. One day, a guy came by and he said, "Hey, GI, you got cigarette?" So this friend of mine I was talking to, he took out a pack of Camels and offered him one and gave it to him. And the guy said, "Oh, Camels, day number 1. And then I said, "Well, yeah, what about Cools?" Which was the mentholated cigarettes, because we got all kinds of cigarettes free. And nobody wanted Cools. And he'd say, "Cools? Oh, no. Number 10. And it seemed everything was either number 1 or number 10. There was nothing in between. And that was something that we took home, too, that phrase. Okay, go ahead.
What would you do if you were young and another war started in the region?
I'd go hide. I mean, if there's another war in that region, that probably is going to mean World War III. I'd like to backtrack just for a moment, though, and say that not too long ago, I was talking to one or both of my daughters, and I was talking about the day that the war started in Korea, June 25th, 1950. And I was telling them that I had a long conversation with my father about it that day, because Korea's time is, I think, like 12 hours ahead of us. So we well knew this by the time we got up, that North Korea had invaded South Korea. And I said, telling my daughters this, I said, I remember it was Sunday. And one of them looked at me, she said, "Dad, how could you remember 70 years later that it was Sunday?" I said, "I don't know, I just did." So she got her phone and said, "Google," and yeah, it was a Sunday. Okay, Dad. But we did talk about it, and I was aware of Korea because in 1948, I moved into New York City to live with my father and my stepmother. I had to take the 3rd Avenue L from 23rd Street down to Grand Street in Manhattan to go to high school. And I bought the New York Times for a nickel or a dime every day. And I read it on this like a commuter. So I was familiar with the fact that Korea had been invaded by Japan in 1910 and occupied it until the end of World War II in 1945. And then that the Russians and the Americans had come together and they said, "Okay, we're going to split the country in two on the 38th parallel." And which we did. And okay, the only one other thing I want to say about the 38th parallel, I remember in November 1950, the Allied forces, the U.S. and the other UN forces, moved north of the 38th parallel into North Korea. And I thought that was a mistake then, and I still do, because once our troops got to the Yalu, the Chinese came in huge numbers and pushed us all the way back again, back down. And the war ended in a I guess, a draw. In other words, they were on their side of the 38th parallel, and we were on our side.
Have you been back to Korea after the Korean War?
No.
Mm.
I didn't have any particular interest in going back.
Okay. What is your feeling about the war in Korea and the war and Korea now toward Korean and American governments on the Korean War, and what about U.S. current policy toward Korea?
Oh, I don't have much of a feeling about that. I remember during the war, the president of Korea was a guy named Syngman Rhee, and he wasn't so much a president; he was an autocrat or dictator. And now I'm very pleased that South Korea seems to be a flourishing democracy, and I hope it stays that way.
Are you aware of Korea's simultaneous achievement of both rapid economic development and democratization?
Oh, of course I am. Yes, very much so. I mean, Samsung and all of that. Yeah, they have one of the biggest and best economies in the world.
What is the legacy of the Korean War and Korean War veterans?
What is the legacy of it? Well, it's often referred to as the Forgotten War, and I'll give you an example. Many, many years ago, the New York Times carried an ad from USO, which is United Service Organizations. These are people, professional entertainers that go out and entertain the troops. And I guess it was an anniversary. And the ad said, "We of the USO are so proud that we've been able to serve our people in the armed forces during World War I, World War II, and and Vietnam." And guess what was left out?
Korea.
And I think that's the legacy that we have, is that when that war was going on, this country was flourishing because of millions of GIs were going to school on the GI Bill, and GIs were getting married and having children, and it was good times, except for those people who went to Korea.
In 2013, we witnessed the 60th anniversary of the armistice, which was signed by China, North Korea, and the UN on July 27th, 1953. There is no war in modern history that has lasted 60 years after an official ceasefire, and the mutual hostility among parties involved has continued. What do you think we have to do to put a closure on it?
What do I think? What
do you think we have to do to put a closure on it?
Well, it'd be nice to sign a peace treaty, but I don't see that happening. That's 60 years. Well, it was 2013. There were many incidents occurred at Panmunjom between South Korean and American troops and those from North Korea, and some of them resulted in deaths to American soldiers, I know. I remember, of course, that the talks started like in 1951, 2 years before the war ended. And so by the time we got to Korea, there was all the rumors all the time. Oh, it's going to be over. It's going to be over. It's going to be over. And we didn't believe it because the talks had been going on so long. But eventually on July 27th, it did end.
Would you support the reunification of a divided Korea?
Oh, absolutely. I think it would be, take a look at Germany. Although I think it's taken Germany a long time since the walls came down. What was that, 89? For the unification of the country. But I think it's working well. And I think the same thing would happen in Korea. But of course, that's not going to, I don't see that in the future. I really don't.
Any message to young generations?
Yeah, try to stay out of the service. Well, see, there's no draft today.
Mhm.
So if those people that want to be in the military, they're there because they volunteered.
Are there any other memories from that time that you would like to share?
Well, wait a minute. No, I think I pretty much covered it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, both of you. I might add here that granddaughter and son-in-law are doing this for me, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Welcome.
Yes.